Here there be dragons, but where do they come from? Through all of Norse mythology, you hear nary a word of where dragons come from. Well, you're in luck today, heroes and adventurers all, because that is our tale. So if you'll join me, let us delve back in time. Today we are back in the realm of Kratos and Atreus, and we are talking about dragons. Now, the first dragon that we encounter, Herzalir, and I might be saying that wrong. Herzalir is the first dragon that we encounter in the tale of Kratos and Atreus in their journey through Midgard. A large, red, ferocious dragon in the mountains of the dwarves, guarding what appears to be some old treasures, but nothing in particular. He is incredibly aggressive towards us as we approach. Now, there is no real grounds for this creature in Norse mythology. He does not exist. His name translates roughly to terror or horror, insinuating the feeling of being deeply afraid. Other than that, he does not really exist, though there is an implication that this particular dragon originates from the place where all of the other dragons do. Now, for this, we're going to have to go back in time a little bit to remember what the origins of the dragons are. Now, if you have not already seen my video on the dwarves, Brock and Sindri and all of the other dwarves mentioned in the Tale of God of War, I strongly recommend you go and you watch it. That will be in the card up above. Now, dragons, where do they come from? Well, like many creatures that are unexplained, they're not really explained in regular mythology. But in the realm of Kratos and Atreus, we get this small narrative in the beginning, and as we go on, by the way, spoiler alerts on this tale. If you have not already experienced the tale yourself, there will be many spoilers in this, as all of the dragons that are faced are side quests that you cannot get to until very later on in the questing of Kratos and Atreus. Now, that being said, all of the dragons beside Herzalir are dwarves. And this has real foundation in Norse mythology. Dwarves are very commonly represented as skilled and powerful magic users, as well as incredibly powerful warriors and craftsmen. But these particular dragons all actually exist as dwarves in our real-world mythology of Midgard. That being said, all dwarves in Norse mythology are seen as shapeshifters. When they are born from the maggots of Ymir's corpse. Now, that is the actual mythology. After Ymir was slain, his body was left to rot, and from his body fell hundreds of maggots, and from those maggots spawned dwarves and dark elves. All dwarves have the ability to shapeshift, but in the tale of Kratos and Atreus, they got stuck for one reason or another. So let's go through the dragons, and then on each one we will... No, you know what? Let's go through the dragons, and then I will tell you their real-world story. So, here we go. The first is Regin, captured by the Dwarven King and forced to be the sentry of Con Unsgard, but isn't particularly good at its job. And what we'll see with all of the dragons is that they are guarding something, that they are captured and guarding something. The second dragon that we meet is Otr, and Otr is also guarding a sentry. Now, I haven't reached these places myself in the Tales of Kratos and Atreus. This is going based solely off of the lore available through the wikis, as well as the real-world lore for these characters. Now, the last, but actually the first, is Fafnir. And it is said that Fafnir was once a dwarf, and his greed overtook him, and because of that, he turned into a dragon and was forced to sit atop his hoard as the scaly beast. Now, I said in the tale on the dwarves that the dwarf Andvari may very well have been the catalyst for Ragnarok, and it's not even a may very well have been. if you set everything up linearly, and of course, I am taking liberties with the story, but I'm not including anything from the tales of my family in this. And for those of you who are new here, I do have some family lore that I occasionally make videos on. That is not what is happening here today. This is pure Norse, what you can find in books lore, and the lore of the God of War video games. So, let us get into the meaty part of this here tale. If anybody had questioned as to whether or not Loki was sort of a dickhead, you're gonna get more confirmation here in this story. Now, there was a dwarven leader who is sometimes seen as a king, sometimes seen as a wizard. His sons turn into lizards, named Herdemir. Now, in some of the stories, these characters are his sons, and in some they are his brothers. In all of them, Fafnir is his son. So Ottar and Regin, we'll say for sake of brevity, are his sons. But in some of the mythology translations, they are his brothers. But they are very powerful wizards amongst the dwarven realm, and they are very powerful craftsmen. Well, what ends up happening is Loki, while out and about, sees a very large and beautiful otter, and desiring its pelt above all else, he goes and he kills it. Well, this was Ottar, the youngest brother of Herdemir. Am I saying that right? Herdemar. I don't know. Alex, if you're watching, correct me. And upon slaying him, then makes a fine uppercoat out of the pelt. Well, Odin, Loki, and Thor then go about visiting Herdemir. And who should be wearing the pelt of the otter but Loki? Now, of course, Herdemir being the Hreidamar, being the knowledgeable gentleman that he was, immediately recognized the pelt and was enraged and demanded the head of Loki. But instead, Loki, being the clever lad that he was, negotiated instead for a grand sum of money. Loki and Odin give their oath that Loki will pay a large sum for the transgression that he has committed against Hreidamar, and in doing so, Loki knows where he can get this wealth without having to work for it. From the dwarf, Andvari. Andvari being the wealthiest of all the dwarves, and quite possibly the wealthiest being in all of the 9 realms because of his skills with alchemy. Andvarnot, his ring would create more rings, his arm ring would create more rings just like it, of the same size, weight, and quality every, I think it was either created 9 every 8 days or 8 every 9 days. I don't remember right off the top of my head, but it's not relevant to the story. Andvari would swim from his home behind the waterfall as a large salmon, and Loki tried for several days to catch him upon a hook, but being unable to, he went and borrowed the net of Ran, the sea goddess of the dead, the only net at the time existing in all of the world. And in doing so, caught Andvari, and was able to steal from him his entire hoard. But while Loki was distracted packing up his hoards, Andvari dropped a curse upon his arm ring, Andvarnot, that whoever should hold it and his hoard will suffer a terrible, terrible fate. Now, once this is delivered to Hreidamar, he of course takes the hoard and spares Loki's life. But Hreidamar's son then becomes headstrong with greed from their newfound wealth and transforms himself into a dragon, stealing the whole of the hoard and killing his father, banishing his remaining brother Regin. And it's very vague. There's no direct reference in any of the mythologies to this, but there is some talk of banishing him to cold, which would have been Jotunheim, and some talk of banishing him to the heats, which would have, of course, been Niflheim. You can feel free to discuss it down below where you think he might have been sent. Once the horde found its way to Fafnir, he found that he could no longer transform back from being a dragon once he had transformed, and eventually he would be slain by Sigurd after having met Regin, his banished brother, upon the road, and it is believed that Sigurd also slays Regin. Because there is some debate as to why, but it was believed that Regin at the time had also taken the form of a dragon. Now, once the wealth is accumulated by Sigurd and the dragon slain, Sigurd takes the wealth with him and he pockets the arm ring as a present for his potential betrothal to Brunhild. But this ends terribly as Sigurd eventually meets a terrible fate. Now, there is a gap in the mythologies here, but at some point, the hoard and the ring end up back in the possession of Frigg, the main wife of Odin. And she would gift it to her son, Balder, who was beloved by all. Now, Balder was a warring god, well known for his abilities on the battlefield, but Frigg received sight that he would die a painful death and would become the catalyst for the starting of Ragnarok. So she made sure that that would not happen, but she oversought the element of mistletoe. And the Andvari's ring and his hoard become a gift for the Council of the Aesir, and in turn become a gift for Balder. And his mother gifts him the ring of Andvari shortly before Loki discovers that mistletoe is capable of killing Balder, and he tricks his blind brother Hodor into firing an arrow made of mistletoe at his brother whilst everyone at the party is attempting to kill him. Now, this wasn't done maliciously. After they discovered that he could not be killed, all of the gods joined in on the fun, throwing axes and spears and shooting arrows. So no one thought anything of it when Hodor loosed an arrow made of mistletoe. But it killed Balder, and this would be the start of the turn of events that would lead to Ragnarok, and Andvari's ring would eventually end up back in the possession of none other than the All-Father, the god of the gallows, Odin. So it is interesting how dragons and dwarves end up almost being the entire catalyst for the end times, but that is also a subjective argument, because all of these things in turn are in fact caused either by accident or by design by the trickster god, the last of the Jotun, Loki. If you enjoy these stories, I have many more here upon my collection of tales and whimsies, so please feel free to browse while you are here. I even have a podcast that covers stories called Endless Epic, where we are discussing the Phantom Tollbooth, and I do all of my announcements for these things over on my Instagram page. All of these things linked in the script and tell section down below. If you have not already destroyed the subscribe button, I strongly recommend you engage it in Mortal Kombat, and you will know that you have won when it is drained of blood and becomes a deathly grey. And then you can gently ring the victory bell placed conveniently to its right, and as a bonus for your victory, you will always know when I upload a video. You can also get my podcast a week early and enjoy some of my Dungeons & Dragons content over on my Patreon page, where I release my podcast early and we have Dungeons & Dragons content. There you go. It's pretty simple. Thank you, heroes and adventurers, for joining me for another tale. All I have to say is stay bloodthirsty, my friends, and remember, all hail.